Shabbat Shalom. Good morning, everyone. I am Rabbi Jenny Greenspan here, Congregation Beth-El in Indianapolis, Indiana. And I want to welcome you this morning to our Shabbat Torah Talk, our weekly brief look at our Torah portion any given week, taking note of something special in the Torah portion. This week we are reading, it's actually a double parsha, two portions, Tazria and Mitzorah. These two are often joined together, especially in years like this one that are not a leap year. And these two are the heart of what makes reading through Leviticus difficult in our modern age, because these two are very much looking at a sacrificial system that we don't use anymore. They are very much looking at a healing system we don't use anymore, as we have made significant progress in science and medicine since the Torah was written. And yet I think we can still search out a bit of meaning in them. It's one of my favorite rabbi challenges, is going through the book of Leviticus, especially this pair of portions, Tazria and Mitzorah. Tazria, the first of these two portions, spends much of its time looking at ways that our bodies can become tameh and tahor. Tameh is often translated as impure, but I think that there is something deeper to be looked at in that term, because I don't think it means impure in the way that we think of the word in English. I don't think that there is a sense of being tainted, irreparably tainted in some way, which pure versus impure does imply in the English. But tameh is some kind of ritual uncleanliness, some kind of reason that one should refrain from doing certain rituals. And so someone who is tameh is not supposed to go to the temple and is not supposed to do sacrifices until it's time for them to become tahor. Tameh is opposite once again. So I want to look at some of the reasons that someone becomes tameh, and then come back to the opening of the second of our two Torah portions, Mitzorah. Because most of the reasons that one can become tameh have to do with some kind of instance of confronting mortality. Coming into contact with an animal that isn't kosher can make someone, the carcass can make someone tameh in this context. And most of the animals that are not kosher sustain themselves on other animals. Many of those animals are predators. Not all of them, but many of them. And another thing that can make someone tameh is bodily discharges, or as gets explored deeply in the second Torah portion, they have some kind of skin disease, tzara'at, often translated as leprosy, but not probably not the same thing as we consider leprosy today. And the most significant source of becoming tameh is being near a corpse, a human corpse, a human who has passed away. So all of these instances that someone can become tameh are surrounding a recognition that we're mortal. And we are able to live most of our lives not thinking about that. Most of the time that we go about our daily lives, we're not thinking about the fact that someday we will die, and we're not thinking about the fact that someday those closest to us will. And we, God willing, for much more time, we have much time left, and we have a lot of life to experience. But most of the time, when we go about our daily lives, we don't think about the fact that we are in fact mortal, and we become tameh when there is something in life that forces us to confront that. When we come into contact with a person who has passed, when we come into contact with an animal that sustains itself on the flesh of other animals, when we come into contact with disease. A woman who gives birth is celebrating the joy of life, and she becomes tameh because childbirth, especially in the ancient world, was extremely dangerous for a woman. All of these opportunities to become, all of these things that cause someone to become tameh are confronting death in some way. some kind of brush with mortality. And so I want us to take a look at the opening of the second Torah portion, Mitzorah. So if you are following along with me, if you have an Etz Chaim Chumash, I didn't say this at the beginning, I apologize. If you have an Etz Chaim Chumash handy, you can pull up to page 660 if you have the physical book with you. If you need to get the PDF, just go to the bez613.org webpage and go over to the virtual Shabbat resources, scroll down to Torah Talk resources and click the Etz Chaim link and you'll get a PDF of the Etz Chaim. If you're using any other Chumash, any other copy of the Torah text, I am in Leviticus chapter 14 and we're going to look at the very opening of the chapter. We'll give just a moment for us to track down that page, 660 in an Etz Chaim, whether physical or PDF. Or any others, Leviticus chapter 14, verse 1. Okay, so as I was back to where I was thinking, we're talking about tameh, becoming tameh. Much of Tazria looks at the reasons that someone can become tameh. And then Mitzorah, the second of the Torah portions that we are looking at, opens with, and God spoke to Moses saying, "This shall be the ritual for a leper, someone with tzara'at, at the time that he is to be purified. B'yom tohorato, v'huva el hakohen." He'll come to the kohen. He will come to the priest. Tahara, is the opposite of tameh. We call it pure. Again, the English seems to say purified, but I think it's about getting past the moment of being tameh and getting past the moment of recognizing mortality. And if you were to continue reading chapter 14, we see a very detailed ritual, one that seems quite foreign to us today. It involves the priest checking for the scabs that were indicative of this particular disease, seeing that those have healed, and then it involves sacrifices, including birds and cedar and hyssop, and so on. You can read through the details if you want to, but I'm actually less interested in the details of this ritual than the fact that there is one. Because often when we have the moments that would make us tameh, when we have the moments where we have to recognize our mortality, we do our best to brush it off. We do our best to, that was a scary moment and I'm okay now. And yet here it seems that we're actually meant, in the process of healing from or moving past whatever made us confront mortality and going back to the daily life where we tend not to think about it much, requires a ritual. We can't just go from tameh immediately to tahor. Because this particular person, this person who had tzara'at, who had this leprosy disease, is healed. The priest checks that he's healed, and he's healed. You might think that he should, as soon as his skin is clear and it looks like he's healed, he should be able to be like, okay, great, healed, done, over that disease. I'm tahor again. I am pure again. I can go back to my normal rituals. But that's not the case. In fact, the priest has to go through a number of sacrifices on his behalf, and then the person has to go through a number of sacrifices for himself. There's actually a couple of days in this process. And it's several things to be sacrificed, and the Torah even gives options for depending on one's income. If someone is not wealthy enough to give the whole, there's still a suggestion of a sacrifice that someone could give, because it's not enough spiritually to just be physically healed. We've gone through a year where none of us has been able to go as long as usual without recognizing mortality. We've seen hundreds of thousands of Americans pass from COVID-19 that has kept us at home and doing things this way. We have seen too many mass shootings in our country. Just this year alone, we've already lost about, I don't even remember the number, because it has already been too many. 8 here in our own city a couple of days ago. We haven't been able to go this year without seeing mortality. in our faces. We haven't. And I think Mitzorah here is suggesting, this Torah portion is suggesting that we have to face that. We have to take a moment to look at it, perhaps a ritual, perhaps when we are ready to feel safe going back out into the world as the vaccines have made it possible. We can't just say, okay, my leprosy is clear, I'm going to go back. We say, okay, now I'm going to take a moment to see what I have gone through, to see the trauma. Our tradition offers many rituals. We've seen hand-washing rituals. Perhaps when it's time for you to come back to whatever it is you have been distanced from this year, invite you to take a moment and do some kind of ritual. Perhaps it's washing hands. Perhaps it is writing. Perhaps it's art. Do something to take a moment to appreciate that you've survived the brush with mortality. Take something do some kind of ritual to recognize that our lives are a blessing. They'll last as long as they can, and unfortunately won't last forever, but we take a moment to face that so that we can return to life. Not tahor as in pure, but tahor as in more appreciative, more encompassed, and more ready to take on the blessing and appreciation of everything that life has to offer. We'll end here. Say Shabbat Shalom. Thank you so much for joining me here. I hope you'll join also for our bar mitzvah this morning on our live stream at 10 o'clock. Just go to bez613.org and hit the live in our sanctuary where we will be celebrating the bar mitzvah of Jake McIntosh this morning. And I hope to see you all soon. I wish you a week of joy and of peace, and I wish you a week of really appreciating all that life has to offer, and encourage you to think of some kind of ritual that perhaps you might be able to see. Shabbat Shalom.